All right, folks, now we're going to begin part 2 of our 3-part series called Maitreya, the Buddha to Come, Mahayana Buddhism's Prophecy of the Messiah. And so the first 4 parts were covered in part 1, and now we're going to pick up with part 5. It's called Amitabha, the Buddha of Boundless Light. And it starts, as we explored in part 1, the fixed star Vega of the constellation Lyra is the Adi Buddha of our solar system. From within the Vajradhara or spiritual mind of Vega are emanated 7 rays of spiritual light. In Mahayana Buddhism, these 7 rays are personified as the 7 celestial Buddhas, each personifying one of the 7 spiritual qualities of Vega's consciousness. Each of the 7 celestial Buddhas manifests a vibration, color, theme, and mood. These qualities are made manifest into the solar system through the person of 7 celestial bodhisattvas. Together, the 7 celestial Buddhas, working through 7 celestial bodhisattvas, manifest the 7 rays of Vega's consciousness into the solar system. This is all material that I went over in the previous episode, so hopefully it's familiar to you now. The evolving life of the planet is held within the womb of the solar orb. Through this connection, the powers of all 7 rays that are within the sun are made manifest here on Earth. In the life of the evolving planet, the 7 powers of the 7 rays are ever present. But the planet has to evolve through 7 cycles of evolutionary development in order to bring all 7 of these soul powers into a state of full realization. The sun possesses all 7 of these rays in full development in the form of the 7 bodhisattvas. The Earth, a developing solar embryo held within the body of the sun, has not yet achieved its full evolution. Therefore, not all of the rays are fully developed and brought into manifestation within the Earth, meaning within each cycle, an additional ray is brought into manifestation. In each age, one additional ray is brought into development, and only at the end of all 7 ages will all 7 rays be fully developed. Each of the Earth's 7 developmental ages brings one additional quality of consciousness from one of the 7 celestial bodhisattvas into manifestation. The 4th age, which is the age that preceded ours, gave birth to the ray personified by Amitabha, the Buddha of Boundless Light. Amitabha, or Amida as he is also called, is the 4th ray to manifest here on Earth, with 3 others preceding him. In our current age, all 4 are present and able to be brought into active manifestation. Our current age is in turn giving birth to the consciousness of a 5th ray, or 5th celestial Buddha, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but called Amoghasiddha. Given that our age is still not complete, the consciousness of this Buddha is still coming into formation. So it exists as a seed archetype, but is not yet fully manifest within humanity, is being manifested through humanity today. In the 5th age, the consciousness of a new ray is set to be released. But before this takes place, all of humanity must first be brought up to the point where it is fully awakened to the 4th ray, the ray of Amida. This has not yet happened for the majority. Before mankind can collectively manifest the 5th ray, it must first develop and release Amitabha's ray of consciousness. Only once this has taken place can mankind then work toward the release of the 5th ray. Amida's ray of consciousness is the one that mankind must first bring to complete realization before the ray of the 5th age can fully be made manifest here on Earth. I'm restating the same point because I want you to really take this message home. Only once this 5th ray is brought into manifestation will the destiny of our age be fulfilled. Then the Earth and the human kingdom within it can move on to the 6th stage of its evolution. So these are the steps that await us. According to the Mahayana system of religious philosophy, the wisdom of the 4th ray was made manifest into the collective body of mankind through the last historical Buddha to incarnate, Gautama Buddha. Through Gautama, the doctrine associated with Amitabha's wisdom ray was revealed to the world, and he symbolizes its perfection, or he embodies it. This doctrine of Amida's is termed the heart doctrine. For mankind to complete its destiny in the fifth age, it must first learn and embody the heart doctrine. Only then will it gain the resources it needs to generate from within itself the human Buddha for the fifth age, Maitreya, which is what this messianic figure is called in Mahayana Buddhism. It's called Maitreya Buddha, the fifth human Buddha after the one who's to follow Gautama. This forthcoming human Buddha is said to currently be awaiting embodiment in the heavens outside of the planetary sphere of the earth, meaning that realm where the solar life interfaces with the upper realms of the earth. Needless to say, because of its importance for the destiny of our age, the wisdom teachings associated with the ray of Amida is essential for us to understand and appreciate. For us humans of the fifth age, the ray of Amida should be revered as the gateway through which the doors to the fifth celestial Buddha, Amoghasiddha, can be opened and its ray of consciousness released into active manifestation. For this reason, the heart doctrine should be revered as the path that we all must learn to follow. As Manly Hall explains, Amida is the being of the higher self, personified as a heaven world of consciousness, in which consciousness enjoys the jewels of its own blossoming. So Amida is the personification of a state of enlightened consciousness. The heart doctrine is designed to awaken this mode of consciousness within the self. The purpose of the heart doctrine is to attune the consciousness of the individual person, the ego, with the spiritual consciousness of its higher spiritual self, the superego, or sattva principle, as it's called in Sanskrit. This is the aspect within each of us that is divine and is a bodhisattva in the making. So as soon as you elevate the sattva principle to the level of bodhi, then you become the bodhisattva, because that's the level where the higher self exists. The seed archetype that is within each of us, that is the incarnating self that remains throughout all these different lifetimes, exists within this plane of the solar sphere, and is from that point is injecting personalities into this earthly sphere through these various embodiments. So that's the point of the heart doctrine, to marry the higher and the lower. And in so doing, you awaken this fourth ray, this Amida ray of consciousness. In his description of Amitabha and the state of spiritual consciousness that he personifies, Manly Hall writes, quote, "As the Buddha of boundless light, Amitabha signifies the light of reality itself, which illumines, that is, makes knowable to the subjective powers of the human being, the very mystery of existence. This boundless light is not a physical, but a spiritual radiance by which the substance of things beyond form and dimension is known to the open eye of the seer, or the third eye. In this way, Amida personifies wisdom as an eternal reality of consciousness manifesting forever on the plane of the solar orb." And now this is back to me in my words. "This ray of consciousness is eternally there as a state of realization to those who have developed the capacity to become receptive to it. Those rare individuals who do evolve themselves to this state become bodhisattvas, or beings of enlightenment." That's another way that you can translate bodhisattva, means a being of enlightenment, because bodhi is that principle of enlightenment. Amida's kingdom is a heavenly dimension of consciousness where the higher self of each person resides. So Amida is that state of consciousness, and it's described as his kingdom. That quality of consciousness is his kingdom. So all who tune themselves to this quality of consciousness come under his rulership as far as this particular ray goes. So yeah, in the Mahayana system, this dimension or this quality of consciousness is called the Western Paradise, or the Pure Land, and sometimes also Sukhavati. And again, that's like the heavenly paradise that we see, the New Jerusalem, the Shambhala. Sukhavati references the paradisical heavenly world of myth. In the Mahayana system, it is described as a sphere of karmic compensation given as a reward to humans who have purified their souls to the point that they become receptive to its harmonic pattern in terms of the rate of vibration of the state of consciousness that it represents. So that ray represents a rate of vibration, you could say, a harmonic tone that you come into resonance with. In reality, souls attain to this sphere by awakening themselves to its ever-present state of existence. This means that enlightenment is an ever-present reality of our psychological lives, and the task of each individual is to awaken themselves to it. The consciousness of Amitabha, as well as that of the other 6 celestial Buddhas that accompany him, is made manifest within the solar system through the being of 7 celestial bodhisattvas. The word bodhisattva is a compound word that combines the root word of Buddha, which is bodhi, with another root word, sattva. Sattva is a Sanskrit word that means self or self-consciousness. It is the principle of individuality at its highest state of expression. The sattva is the true self or higher self of each person, as opposed to the ego, and exists as a microcosm or downward reflection of the Vajrasattva. Remember we talked about the Vajrasattva as being the divine self, where the sattva part of that word is that individual principle. And so each of us has this individual principle as our higher self, this sattva, and this sattva is a microcosm of this, for each of us, of this divine self, this Vajrasattva, which in our case is the Manushi Buddha. Through this method of disambiguating the term, we can see that a bodhisattva is a word that refers to an enlightened being, someone whose consciousness has been refined to the state where they have become pure, clear instruments for the consciousness and light of the 7 rays to be transmitted. Through these bodhisattvas, the wisdom of the Buddhas is made manifest in our solar system. Bodhisattvas are usually depicted as sitting on lotus blossoms, this representing the fact that these entities put in the work to evolve themselves to this state in a previous round of evolution. Like us, they have risen from ignorance and, like the lotus, grown up through the darkness of unreality to finally blossom in the light of perfect realization. And that last part was a quote of Manly Hall's that I incorporated in the sentence. As Manly Hall describes them, the 7 bodhisattvas are the sons of wisdom. Through them, unconditioned reality is manifested in varying degrees in the conditioned universe. Again, that's a Manly Hall quote. The open lotus that bodhisattvas are associated with in Buddhist art represents life perfected through experience. This references the idea that these bodhisattvas once evolved through a lower state to attain their present exalted condition. In this way, they become the ideal heroes for terrestrial mankind to revere, setting an example that each person must try to imitate and reproduce within themselves as they evolve and grow. The 7 bodhisattvas exist as ideals for us to follow. They represent man in its future perfected state, implying that within each of us is the seed of a bodhisattva that is still blossoming within its lotus petal. We are gradually evolving to become bodhisattvas just as they are gradually evolving to one day become Buddhas. Quoting Manly Hall, now they are ascending to the state of Buddhahood, their growth accomplished through their contributions to the growth of all other beings. The great vow of the bodhisattva is the ultimate standard by which their saintliness is measured. These entities have foregone their potential to go on to a higher state of universal consciousness, or parinirvana, and have instead returned to a lower sphere of existence that they've already graduated past needing to involve themselves with. Here on this lower plane, they offer themselves as instruments through which the wisdom necessary for man's evolution can be departed to it, ensuring its growth. So they're instruments, they offer themselves as instruments so that the next generation can grow, because they offer themselves as the archetype of the way forward. So that's the end of part 5. Part 6, the Amitabha triad. So we introduced the concept of the celestial Buddhas and celestial bodhisattvas, and now we're going to move on to the Amitabha triad, which is a particular celestial Buddha, and the triad incorporates 2 of his sort of patron bodhisattvas. So we're going to examine 2 bodhisattvas and the Buddha Amitabha and look at how this trinity of spiritual entities works together and what relation this trio has to each person. This is an important aspect of the heart doctrine. So the Amitabha triad. The 7 celestial bodhisattvas exist within the solar sphere. Their field or aura of consciousness extends between heaven and earth, binding the spiritual life of the sun with the evolving orders of life still existing in our terrestrial sphere. Bodhisattvas are beings who have evolved their souls or sattvas to the point where they are able to manifest the quality of consciousness of the celestial Buddha whose light they are embodying. So remember, each bodhisattva is associated with a particular celestial Buddha. A bodhisattva is literally a light being, its light being the ray of the particular celestial Buddha whose consciousness they are manifesting. The enlightenment already attained by the 7 bodhisattvas allows them to serve as vehicles or instruments through which the 7 rays can manifest through the evolving kingdoms of life on earth. As Manly Hall explains, the Buddhas sow the seeds of infinite wisdom in space, and the bodhisattvas reap the harvest, bringing it to perfection by guarding and guiding the unfoldment of living creatures. So the bodhisattvas are intermediaries between the 7 rays and the form of the planet, the fourth world, the sphere of the earth. They're the intermediaries that exist within the sun. They exist within the body of the sun. At Earth's present state of evolution, not all 7 rays have been brought into active manifestation. The Earth is in the 5th of 7 grand cycles of its evolution. As such, only 4 of the 7 rays have been released here on Earth in full, with a 5th actively manifesting. The 4th ray is still in the process of being released within the collective body of mankind, as is the 5th to a greater degree of rarity. So if the majority are still working to come to the realization of the 4th ray, then those who have attained this realization already amounts to a relatively small number of people. And those are the group that are working to manifest the 5th ray. So that's the basic division. We have the majority still needing to receive the 4th ray, which is this is the path of the heart doctrine, actually. You go through the 4th ray to get to the 5th, and the 5th ray is associated with a type of intellectual wisdom, and the 4th ray is associated with a type of heart wisdom. So you have to go through the heart to get to the intellect, because if you have the intellect that's not yet redeemed by the heart, it's going to go in the wrong direction, or it's going to be led by the wrong desires, and flame out, so to speak. So the incentive and motive for the will and the intellect to be directed towards is essential. So that's what the 4th ray provides, is this experience of Amitabha, the consciousness of Amitabha. It's this experience of love through compassion and service. So to recap briefly, at present, the spiritual qualities of the 4th and 5th rays are being actively developed and released here on Earth. The development of these rays is, from a spiritual standpoint, the main purpose for mankind's existence here on Earth at the present time. Of the 7 bodhisattvas existing within the solar sphere, 2 in particular are held to be particularly important in regards to the present evolution of humanity. These 2 are intimately associated with the celestial Buddha Amitabha. One is named Avalokita, and the other is named Manjushri. Together, Amitabha and these 2 bodhisattvas form the Amitabha triad. So Amitabha is like a union between positive and negative, and then the bodhisattva Avalokita, who also goes by the name Kuan Yin, and in Christianity we recognize as the Virgin Mary. This is the yin aspect of Amita's consciousness, representing the compassion side. And then Manjushri represents the yang aspect or wisdom aspect of Amitabha's consciousness. So so Manjushri and Avalokita are the yang and yin elements of Amitabha's consciousness. So picking back up, as I just stated, Kuan Yin and Manjushri embody the anima and animus, or feminine and masculine polarities of Amitabha. Kuan Yin embodies Amita's consciousness in the form of compassion, while Manjushri embodies it in the form of wisdom. These 2 qualities are the yin and yang principles of the ray of divine consciousness that Amitabha personifies. These 2 bodhisattvas exist within the sun, or the solar sphere, where Amida's ray of consciousness is enthroned. There, seated upon their lotus thrones, they remain forever in contemplation, deep in the eternal state of the principle which they personify. That was a quote read at the end there by Manly Hall. As Manly explains, the name Avalokita, or Kuan Yin, means, quote, the one who looks down, or he who hears the voice of the world. This name is a reference to the idea that this bodhisattva is specially mindful of the sorrows, burdens, and spiritual yearnings of human beings. Quote, Kuan Yin is usually described as the beloved son of the Buddha Amitabha. He is therefore the first begotten of the eternal, the Word made manifest, the Son of compassion, the presence of the divine in the assembly of the congregation. He is the patron of the arhats, lohans, hermits, recluses, and sages. Hall continues, Avalokiteshvara, the extended name of Avalokita or Kuan Yin, abides in the western paradise of Amitabha, where he inclines his consciousness in perpetual attentiveness to all creatures that have not yet achieved internal security. The mechanism in which this bodhisattva is able to attune himself to the emotional suffering of humanity is through the field of his aura, which extends down from the sun to envelop the highest and most subtle planes of the planetary sphere, where it penetrates the consciousness of every human at its innermost and uppermost levels. Bodhisattvas exist in a perpetual state of nirvana and have earned this privilege. They are beings who have evolved themselves through past experience to the attainment of a state of perfect wisdom. Amida's consciousness is made manifest in the sun through the experiential quality of nirvana or enlightenment, which Avalokita and Manjushri each embody as its yin and yang polarities. As Manly Hall explains, as the Buddha of boundless light, Amitabha signifies the light of reality itself. This light illumines, that is, makes knowable to the subjective powers of the human being the very mystery of existence. He continues, this boundless light is not a physical but a spiritual radiance by which the substance of things beyond form and dimension is knowable to the open eye of the seer. To attain nirvana is to become one with the consciousness of Amitabha through Avalokita, who channels Amida's ray of consciousness into manifestation within the solar system. The experience of nirvana, according to Manly Hall, is an all-encompassing experience of union with the pure, unselfish emotion of love, which, when experienced, is seasoned heavily with the mood of compassion. Compassion and love are the yin or feminine qualities of Amitabha, with Manly Hall noting that compassion is the universal mood held by the power that meditated the world into existence. So now we're going to jump into the next section, which is called Avalokita, the voice of the silent. So we're just talking about Avalokita or Kuan Yin, and we're going to be going a little bit more into the meaning of this bodhisattva. In Mahayana Buddhism, Amitabha's consciousness is not only associated with the experience of nirvana, but also with the afterlife state where souls go between incarnations. In Mahayana Buddhism, Amitabha's kingdom is called the Pure Land. This celestial paradise is also known by other names, including Sukhavati and the Western Paradise. This kingdom is associated both with the experience of nirvana and with the afterlife state, where humans who have lived according to Amitabha's codes go after death to await their next incarnation. The Western Paradise of Amitabha is mythologized in Mahayana Buddhism's religious philosophy as a blessed afterlife state where the souls of humans who have paid homage to Amitabha's qualities will be taken between incarnations. According to Manly Hall, Sukhavati is not so much a place, but a state of consciousness associated with Amitabha's illuminating brilliance. Quote, Amida is the being of the higher self, personified as a heaven world of consciousness, in which consciousness enjoys the jewels of its own blossoming. At death, the consciousness of the individual ascends back to its spiritual seed or higher self that exists as its superego. The incarnating individuality whose existence extends over hundreds of terrestrial lifespans, each of which exists as the extension downward into matter of the consciousness of this higher spiritual self. So the superego is the spiritual self. This higher self is a bodhisattva in the making. Its developmental process for achieving this ultimate state is carried out over the course of many lifetimes of it undergoing earthly experience, where it repeatedly extends and retracts and then re-extends its consciousness into the earth sphere in the form of human personalities, which it ensouls, vivifies, and guides. The consciousness of this bodhisattva self is enthroned in Amida's pure land, and in the afterlife state ascends back to this level. According to its own degree of evolution, it will be awakened to Amida's brilliance and various degrees of receptivity. The more receptive one has become to it, the more they will experience this afterlife state as a heavenly paradise. In Mahayana Buddhism's religious philosophy, it is believed that those who have lived a life in harmony with Amida's quality of consciousness can experience, at the moment of death, the Amida ray through the form of the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, or Avalokita. This encounter takes form as a profound and enlightening mystical experience, where the blessed Avalokita guides you into a glorious afterlife cycle where you will await your next future incarnation in a state of spiritual bliss or nirvana. Kuan Yin embodies the gentle wisdom of Amitabha's love. This love is, quote, simply put, a pure emotion that symbolizes the longing of parts to return to union with the whole, end quote. This is the mood that permeates heaven and makes the existence of the Pure Land possible. Amida's love principle is something we experience in everyday life through the love we share with each other. This love is, at its core, quote, an objectification of this inner primordial spiritual longing of Amida. And that's the end of the section on Amida, which is section 7 of the overall series. And then number 8 is Manjushri. So now I'm doing a section on each of the bodhisattvas of Amida. So Manjushri, the key word being the alchemist. The great vow of Kuan Yin and Manjushri is the vow of the bodhisattva, which is the vow that the fully evolved soul makes in renouncing their right to absorption into a higher state of spiritual existence, or parinirvana, so that they may come back and selflessly offer themselves as a vehicle through which the wisdom of the 7 rays can be made manifest to a younger cohort of still evolving souls who require its wisdom for their nourishment and development. The seed of the bodhisattva self is within each of us. Kuan Yin reveals this to us through the mystical experience of nirvana. Nirvana is the experience of the lower self coming into conscious communication with the higher spiritual self. But the evolution of this higher spiritual self is not complete until our inner Manjushri has been brought into a state of complete realization and full release. Once cultivated, Manjushri gives the individual the strength and courage to make that final great leap into the parinirvana of a yet greater and more complete state of realization and enlightenment. In astronomical terms, Kuan Yin propels the individual into the realization of the solar self, but Manjushri takes us one step beyond into the realization of the spiritual consciousness of Vega, the father star. Manjushri is the seed potential of an inner adept that exists within each of us. This adept self, or bodhisattva self, is the alchemist, the sage, and the initiator. For Carl Jung, he was Philemon, the personification of wisdom in the form of the archetype of a wise one, existing deep within the unconscious dimensions of our psyche. Representing the intellectual aspect of the higher mind rather than its emotional aspect, which is what Kuan Yin represents, Manjushri, like Hermes, is said to be the author of all books, the writer of all symbols, and the source of all knowledge. Behind Manjushri's use of exoteric symbolism is veiled the esoteric doctrine and its knowledge concerning, quote, the mystery of the ever-becoming of wisdom. This references the mystic, tantric, meditational aspect of the philosopher's path, the level where intellect fades out into a greater mysterious state of pure knowing. This is the state of nirvana associated with the bodhisattva self. So Manjushri is the patron of both the philosopher scholar and the mystic adept. He symbolizes both the intellectual and magical aspects of the doctrine and is considered the embodiment of perfect wisdom perfectly realized. The dual nature of Manjushri, the mystic and the intellect, is represented by the 2 objects he is often depicted as carrying, a sword and a book. As Manly Hall explains, Manjushri is depicted in religious artwork as carrying in one hand the flaming sword of detachment, while in the other the peculiar symbol of the intellect, a book supported in the heart of a lotus blossom. He continues, Manjushri, in his realization as mind, ponders the mystery of life. Here he represents the self as the seeker, realization moving toward the thing to be realized. But on the other hand, this bodhisattva also represents the achievement of realization. This bodhisattva in the doctrines of Lamism is the lord of magic, astrology, oracles, incantations, and charms. It conjures up the worlds and then with its flaming sword destroys the very phenomenal universe it has engendered. Through the doctrine he personifies, Manjushri raises the philosopher and perfects the adept. He is that principle that propels us forward toward the ultimate wisdom of absolute unity. He carries in his hand the sword of quick detachment, and men recognize their nearness to his essence when they hear the sweet voice of inner guidance. The path of wisdom is through him, through the dream to the great awakening. This is a quote right there from Manly Hall. While Avalokita's voice is that of the silence, Manjushri's is that which speaks within us to guide us toward the realization of the great work we are destined for. Manjushri represents the seed archetype of the great work. This spiritual seed already exists within us as the spiritual self, which is above the earth sphere, incarnating personalities into it. The voice of this inner self speaks to us and directs us toward our destiny through its sweet voice. So, quote unquote. So, Manjushri is called the sweet voiced one, while Avalokita is called the voice of the silence. Our task is to awaken ourselves to the guidance of this inner bodhisattva so that we may cultivate and manifest its consciousness fully within our personalities. This is the task that the higher spiritual self within us is seeking to fulfill over the course of hundreds of life cycles. The great alchemical work is the accomplishment of the complete integration of the higher self with its lower bodily vehicle within the course of one lifespan. The adept is an individual from the present life wave who has evolved themselves to the point where they have become a fully conscious realization of the higher self. So the incarnation over the course of many lifetimes prepares the higher self to undergo their last incarnation, which is the incarnation as an adept, or the incarnation at the end of which you become an adept. And this is the this is the lifetime when all of the unredeemed karma has to be redeemed, and the final little bits of it that have not yet been worked through, and at the same time the sort of archetypal growth plan of the whole span of lives is going to be re-experienced and perfected in one lifetime. So here we have explained the reason why these first philosophers, particularly Buddha and Jesus Christ as like an archetypal philosopher as well, and others become mythologized and become leaders of the new forms of religion that emerge after the pagan era, in which God becomes the God-man, and you have the myth of the religion oriented around a story of the founder of the school who undergoes all the stages of the hero's journey, which is a solar symbol, which, you know, Manly Hall and Joseph Campbell have both written about how the archetypal hero story of myth is the hero god is a personification of the sun moving through the zodiac. And so each of these great founders, the lives that are recorded in the myths are not, they're loosely, you might say, derived on the historical facts of the person, but really they are meant to emphasize the point that in one lifetime, this person in the mythologized account they achieved enlightenment by going through all the stages of the zodiac, and by releasing all the necessary rays of consciousness that are involved with their enlightenment. So those things are all encoded within the myth of the sort of exoteric myth of Gautama Buddha, for example, or Jesus Christ. So the historical person would have had, the idea is that the historical person's lifetime, the actual details of it would have in some way imitated or been congruent with this idea that they were undergoing a last lifetime as an adept and were actually in their own way recapitulating the whole zodiac in their lifespan. But this is encoded in a more deliberate symbolical account in the actual mythological tale of these great founders and great leaders. So we have to differentiate that between the exoteric doctrine and the esoteric meaning behind the life of Jesus Christ, for example. That there's a encoded framework of astrological myth underlying it, and that was kind of the point of Manly Hall's epic lecture series, Astrotheology, which maybe one day I'll do like a deep dive into, but that's gonna be a lot of work. But anyway, let's get back to it. So the adept is the individual who evolves themselves to become the ideal of the archetype that the bodhisattva embodies. In this way, they become objective realizations of the bodhisattva ideal. Within the soul of the adept, which is called an arhat in Buddhism a lot of times, so you'll see the word arhat instead of adept, the great work is accomplished. With this integration, the lower self rises to a state of union with the higher self, and thereby attains to a state of immortality, meaning that its consciousness no longer suffers from the attachments that bind it to the cycle of birth and death. In this state, the human becomes complete. By becoming at one with their higher bodhisattva self, they become the realization of the bodhisattva archetype that exists as a seed potential within each of us. Avalokita leads you through the heart to the awakening of this higher self, and after that, the sweet voice of Manjushri will guide you to the final attainment and liberation. We participate in the archetype of Manjushri in our daily lives by participating in the relationship of teacher to disciple. So Avalokita will awaken the fact of the higher self, but Manjushri perfects this relationship. We participate in the archetype of Manjushri in our daily lives by participating in the relationship of teacher and student or disciple. As Manly Hall explains, the archetype of Manjushri's sweet voice is felt in public life as, quote, the speech of the teacher, father, brother, friend. It impels through a secret desire to only do good and to do it lovingly and simply. When we become the student of a greater teacher or the teacher to a lesser student, we participate in the archetype of Manjushri. He is the archetypal guru within each of us, trying to teach the disciple or the lower self, which is the lower animal nature of the human psyche. Manly Hall describes Manjushri's influence within us as, quote, the courage to relax away from the illusion of existence and to live for causes, not effects. This represents the courage to live according to law with absolute conviction. This is the kind of courage you need to follow the path of the initiate, a path that will take you eventually to that final step beyond the mystery of birth and death. According to Manly Hall, this form of courage is, quote, the final courage, which is to place everything in the law and be content. In psychological terms, this is the courage of the ego to release itself to the complete authority of the superego, the higher self within. And that concludes the Manjushri chapter. And then the final section is of this part 2 is called A Philosophy of Synthesis. Before moving on, let's pause and summarize the essential ideas behind the Amitabha triad, which is comprised of, number 1, Amitabha, the celestial Buddha of boundless light. Number 2, Avalokita, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And number 3, Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Ultimately, the three entities in this trinity pertain to a doctrine of synthesis. One complete idea or quality within the divine mind, Amitabha, which again is a ray, one of the 7 rays, or personifies one of the 7 rays that is particularly enthroned in our solar system at the present moment, manifests through the perfect equilibrium between 2 opposing principles, one yang, which is Manjushri, and one yin, which is Avalokita. In Taoism, this exact pattern of thinking is presented in their doctrine of the Tao, with the Tao, or Tao, T-A-O, defined as the eternal fact of equilibrium that forever synthesizes yin and yang, keeping the two always one. Manly Hall expands on this idea. Quote, in the religious philosophy of Asia, all of the divinities, with the exception of the supreme power, the absolute itself, are represented as twofold, or as being polarized. Each of the masculine divinities has its attendant female energy, which is called the Shakti, or goddess, or consort. This is to remind the disciple that every intellectual impulse must have its equivalent emotional reflex. All that flows out must flow back. All that comes forth must return. All that is learned must be used. All that is believed must be proved. All that is possessed must in time possess. Everywhere the law operates through a balanced triad of energies. The law, its operation, and its reaction. In the Amitabha triad, wisdom, in the form of truth or love, rules over strength, in the form of wisdom or courage, and beauty, in the form of faith or compassion. In this way, Amitabha manifests through our consciousness via its two soul powers, which represent its anima and animus, and are personified by the bodhisattvas Avalokiteshvara and Manjushri. Here, the anima represents the emotional extension of realization and is personified by the bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, or Avalokita. The animus represents the intellectual extension of realization and is personified by Manjushri. In more qualitative terms, we can say that Amitabha symbolizes love, which is the absolute ruler of everything that exists. Compassion and wisdom serve this love, bringing all living things in the end to that ultimate good which true love must naturally desire for everything that it loves. That's a quote from Manly Hall. Here we see that wisdom and compassion are complementary polarities of each other. They work together to propel the individual upward toward the complete realization of Amida consciousness. As Manly Hall explains, quote, Manjushri impels consciousness to search for truth through the discovery of self. Avalokita, meanwhile, seeks to forget itself in the service of others. These work together. The search for universal enlightenment, the path that Manjushri embodies, directs consciousness toward the path of service, the path that the bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokita, so beautifully personifies. So naturally, yin and yang work together, but each also has to be dealt with individually. From a spatial standpoint, Manly Hall notes that Avalokita represents centripetal motion, implying motion from the outside moving in, while Manjushri represents centrifugal motion, or motion from the inside moving out. According to Buddhism's heart doctrine, the path to enlightenment first requires one to move from the superficial level of the ego to the inner realization of the self. This is the path of the heart that Kuan Yin personifies. This path is one in which emotional impulses are gradually sublimated and perfected into the pure principle of emotion, which is compassion or love, that Avalokita represents. Only once a connection with the inner self has been made, i.e. the path of Kuan Yin has been fulfilled, or Avalokita, one then moves on to the wisdom path of the Bodhisattva Manjushri, which is the path of the higher intellect. Intellect without a purified heart will not lead you to the ultimate realization of truth. The purification that Amitabha provides clarifies truths and priorities for the individual and provides him with the faculty of discrimination, where, presented with options, he will intuitively choose that which aligns with truth, because he's experienced that truth and known it. In alchemical terms, Manjushri is the sun, Avalokita is the moon, and it is the task of the adept to bring these two principles into a state in which they are equilibrated together, while also being brought into full and complete expression as individual principles within the soul. To Mahayana Buddhists, the historical Buddha Gautama personifies the adept, the individual who rises from the present life wave to synthesize the solar and lunar principles within themselves, and thereby attains to the state of the bodhisattva. Gautama Buddha personifies the individual who perfectly embodies on earth the ray of wisdom that Avalokita embodies within the sphere of the sun. So Gautama Buddha becomes the outer human Buddha who objectifies the ray of Avalokita. So each ray and each bodhisattva becomes associated with a human Buddha, and Gautama is stated to be the human Buddha who embodied the ray of Avalokita. And then by implication, each of the other rays, or each of the other world teachers that arose during the axial age alongside Gautama would represent the other rays. So all 7 rays are brought into manifestation during the age of world teachers through the 7 great world teachers of the age. And then, so jumping forward a bit, if Avalokita and the heart doctrine represent the ray of Amitabha, which is the 4th ray, then the 5th ray, the ray that we're working to manifest now here on Earth, is during this 5th age, it would be, I think, flow through the ray of Pythagoras, because the Greek school and the Pythagorean school would be the one that would be sort of seeded into Western civilization, while Buddhism remains enthroned in the East. So we have the heart doctrine in the East, and then we have something that looks more like the path of Manjushri being followed in the West. Gautama Buddha personifies the individual who perfectly embodies on Earth the archetype of the ray of wisdom that Avalokita embodies within the sphere of the sun. Through Gautama, his doctrine, and his Sangha, or his church or assembly or school, this ray was released into the outer body of mankind. Through the other world teachers of the age, Pythagoras, etc., the other 6 rays were also brought into outward manifestation. Together, these teachers and schools and the doctrines they established catalyzed a major evolutionary progression within the collective life of mankind. As philosophy evolves through the current age, it gradually externalizes the existence of the Sangha, the doctrine, and the teacher to the outer body of mankind so that all may be saved by its light. So each teacher, through the doctrine of teachings that they establish and the schools that they found, that these 2 things carry on this light and bring this light into society. So the initiates and disciples and the work that they do, informing the Sangha, they carry the light and embody the light in a organizational vehicle or an institutional vehicle. They embody this light and manifest it within mankind. So each great world teacher did this in their own way. They manifested their ray within a school and within a doctrine. We are fast approaching a point in which philosophy is being prepared to enter into a new evolutionary phase, with a new level of realization set to accompany it. This will catalyze another major forward motion in the collective body of mankind. This is a progression that we are desperately in need of today. According to the Mahayana Buddhism, this progression will come in the form of Maitreya, the Buddha to come. It is to this topic that we will turn in the 3rd and final essay of this series, or the 3rd and final part of this series. So what I'm trying to say here is that philosophy has gone through different waves of evolution. It starts off in the axial age with its initial birth, but it's in a raw form. This is something I've talked about in the previous episodes. It's in a rawer form. It doesn't have the esoteric doctrine attached to it. That doesn't formally become the esoteric doctrine doesn't formally move into the Sangha until the end of the axial age. Then philosophy gradually continues to develop as an institution over the course of this age, and the vehicles that it's expressing itself through gradually evolve. In each case, the esoteric school that was founded at the end of the axial age, like the Mahayana system, for example, but the Western equivalents that were founded, like Neoplatonism and Hermeticism and Kabbalism and such, the meditation aspect of the doctrine doesn't really become elaborated until around the 1200 AD. So that seems to be a major point, another progression point in the motion, the grand motion of philosophy. And then you could look at Francis Bacon and his new method as being another major progression and the unfoldment of philosophy as a social institution. And the archetype for these progressions already exists within the doctrine. So what we can see is that in these progressions through history, it's actually more and more of the doctrine is being revealed into mankind and is being embodied within mankind. So more and more mankind is elevating themselves to realize and understand more of the doctrine. That's why it's progressing this way. So mankind is being initiated and evolved and lifted upwards in this program, and as it is elevated, more of the doctrine is revealed to it. So that's the pattern. And then there's a quickening that takes place. So this accelerates as more of the doctrine comes, and we're able to absorb more. We're able to advance even faster. So we're along this continuum, moving towards enlightenment. And that's the end of this article. So, or this part 2. So we're going to pick up next with part 3, where we're going to finish things off.